I arrived at Maracaibo. I had 2 canvas bags and a saxophone case. There was nobody there to meet me. I haven't really got much Spanish worth talking about. I was very unsettled. This chap had been kidnapped. He'd been thrown into the back seat of the car. There was a driver and somebody in the back with his foot on this guy's head. Mum was saying, let's just shoot him. So this guy's lying on the floor of a car, hearing people decide about whether he lived or died. Why do you work? What is work about? We probably went about an hour into the bush just walking. He showed me a banana plantation that he had built himself. As I looked at this guy and the pride in his eyes, I could see he was made to work. And I think we're all made to work. We're made to do something that makes a difference. We had a Sherpa by the name of Zhangbu. No word of a lie. Zhangbu lifted the cover off this one. He scooped up the coals in these old leathery hands, lit the fire for us over there. And by that stage, we were all... It's who you are. It's not what you do. Because actually the what you do bit can change. Leadership is a role. It's not a person. Work is really, when it's done well, is about serving other people.
Eddie, it's great to have you here. Excited to hear a little bit of your story. So just to start, can you just give us your kind of elevator pitch of what your business is? What does it do? How'd you end up, just tell me what Charles White's all about.
Yeah, so Charles White is a residential property management business. I guess we're in the business of looking after communally owned areas on behalf of all our owners. So gardens, lifts, the fabric of the building, all that type of stuff. We want to act on behalf of the owners to make sure that's maintained and enhanced. The people's properties are probably the biggest thing they spend money on. So we see that we've got this opportunity to manage that asset for them and to look after them. Our overriding vision, though, is to make a difference in the lives of our clients, our colleagues, and our communities, and to inspire others to do the same. So that's the filter, I suppose, and that's the aspirational aim that we have in everything that we're doing with all those clients. We don't always get it right, but whenever we don't get it right, we hold our hands up. But the aim is always there to genuinely make a difference in that sphere of influence that we've got with them. So yeah, that's what Charles White is about. It's been around for a long time. It was founded in 1840 by Charles White I. So that's quite a few years it's been on the go. You
don't look that old.
Sometimes I feel it.
But you're definitely the oldest business that we've interviewed yet, and maybe you will still be the oldest.
Possibly. I think there's a responsibility in then trying to keep things going. The business has changed over the years as it went through the generations. We got involved in 2001 when Charles White V was looking to retire. Wow. And there was a connection made, and we were able to acquire it and carry on what his family had done. And yeah, as I say, there's a responsibility in having a family-owned business that's been there for a long time. You do want to retain what's good about what's happened in the past, but at the same time always be aware that things need to improve and change and progress as you go on.
It'd be interesting, Eddie, then to kind of talk a little bit about what that was like when you took over the business. But before that, kind of what were you doing, and what led you to even buy the company from Charles White V?
Yeah, before that, I was working in the oil industry. I'd come over from Northern Ireland to Scotland to go to university. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, so I did electronic engineering because I thought that's probably get a job at the end of that. Yeah. But I didn't really like it. Right. So in fourth year, I did a business module as part of that degree, and I did like that. So that kind of charted the course, and I got a graduate job within British Gas here in Edinburgh. Again, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but they put me through chartered accounting training, because at the end of uni, I said I'm not ever doing any more exams, and then suddenly I find myself with 4 more years of exams. But that was good. That was good training and good skills to have. So I worked in British Gas. Then I went to work out of the gas industry and into the oil service industry. So initially based in Aberdeen, then spent a lot of time in traveling in West Africa, and lived in Venezuela for a while.
Okay, so loads of experience from other parts of the world. So what did you take from experiences overseas, and kind of how's that relevant, or how's it shaped things for you here in Edinburgh?
Well, I remember when I first arrived in Venezuela, so I flew to Caracas, managed to make my connecting flight to a place called Maracaibo. I arrived at Maracaibo. I had 2 canvas bags and a saxophone case. That was all I had.
As you do.
So I think the first thing to realize is you can make do with very little.
Yeah.
2 bags and a saxophone. That was all I needed to shift and move life all the way halfway across the world. However, once I had picked up my 2 bags and my saxophone case, there was nobody there to meet me. I'd been promised there'd be somebody there, somebody will have this placard up and they'll have your name on it and they'll know where to take you and there'll be a driver. And so I waited for about an hour probably, and there was nobody there. I'm in Maracaibo, so it's probably about an hour from my ultimate destination. I haven't really got much Spanish worth talking about. Immediately, you're kind of thrown into problem-solving mode. Yeah. So I'm looking around and seeing. Eventually, I saw a car that had the logo of the company that I was working for. So I made my way to the car, and I had a few words of Spanish, and he had a few words of English, and I had some introductory letter to actually prove. Well, it didn't totally prove, but it sort of proved I was who I said I was. Yeah. And we got into a bit of conversation, and eventually he agreed to take me to where I wanted to go. Mm-hmm. So that was a good initial lesson in collaboration and problem solving. And I'm not sure whether it was all done on purpose. Maybe they never intended to put anybody there. This was my initiation, if you like. Yeah. I never actually found that out. But that was a good starting lesson, I suppose, realizing just I'm in a different country. They're speaking a different language. It's different culture. Everything is different. So not assuming that just because I was a graduate and I was I had this nice job, I was an expat. I think it was probably the first time I had a wee bit of realization of a bit of unconscious bias at somehow thinking, or somehow it had been put into you that you're maybe a little bit better than other people. So I think that was a good way of countering that. Yeah. And that whole idea of collaboration just went on. I was joining a multinational team. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody there apart from me, English was their first language. Mm-hmm. So in some ways it was slightly embarrassing that they all had to speak in English of all the meetings. But I guess that was the spoken language of the company, so that didn't matter. But what I found in that was you learn that your way isn't the only way. Mm-hmm. The British way really wasn't the only way of doing things. There were so many other ways, and having your eyes opened to learn that. Yeah. The other thing I learned too was because English wasn't their first language, although they were brilliant at it, you had to listen well and probably explain things better. Yeah. So not just, you couldn't use any form of jargon really. So I think relationships grew at a faster rate because you were genuinely listening to other people. Mm. And with that aim of working together, of collaborating, of having a common aim in mind. Mm-hmm. The other thing I learned there was also just the importance of relationship, I suppose, because in an expat community, you not only work together, but you're socializing. Mm-hmm. So actually you're seeing each other without whatever the title that you have happens to be. Just as a person. So just as a person. And actually I pushed that a little bit further, which was frowned upon a little bit, because I wanted to get to know the local people. There still was a wee bit of a them and us, but I was keen to have that social connection with them. Mm-hmm. The powers that be were happy enough that I did that.
And when you said the kind of the British way or the English way wasn't the only way, have you got an example to bring that to life?
Well, I think British people are a bit uptight sometimes. Mm. They are very much about the task first and foremost, as opposed to the relationship. And I guess other cultures can be so laid back that the task never gets done. Yeah. So I suppose what I saw was just there was that interest in us as individuals. So there would have been conversation about finding out about family, finding out about situations. Whereas in a British context, I hadn't experienced that so much. It was more just come in, here's the task, let's get the job done. That interest in other people wasn't necessarily there. But what I saw was that really broadened the relationship a lot quicker. Yeah. So I could see other people as a dad, as a husband, as a friend, as a member of the sports team. You know, all of those things. Suddenly, you're seeing somebody not just as whatever that job happens to be that's on their door.
And sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, what were you actually doing? Like, what was the job?
So I was a finance controller out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the company, the part of the company that I worked for, we rented out oil rigs to oil companies. So the company owned the rigs, and they employed the crews on the rigs, and would subcontract that to a national oil company or a Chevron, a Texaco, whoever, and then they would have some of their own staff, but we would provide that expertise and that equipment. So it was looking after the finances of all of that, and the payment of the team. Yeah. That was a challenge as well, because it was a highly unionized time, a highly unionized country. I went when, I don't know if you ever heard of the President Hugo Chavez. He had just come into power, and there's quite a lot of, it was very unsettled, and actually with hindsight really quite dangerous. My predecessor told the story of someone in our office who was kidnapped, because where I lived was quite close to the Colombian border. So this chap had been kidnapped. He'd been thrown into the back seat of the car. There was a driver and somebody in the back with his foot on this guy's head. And they were dialoguing in Spanish. And this chap that I knew he could understand. And one was saying, let's just shoot him and be done with it. Lord. And the other was saying, no, we don't need to shoot him. So this guy's lying on the floor of a car, hearing people decide about whether he lived or died. And thankfully, they just bundled him out of the car and he found his way back. So there was a lot of political unrest and therefore a lot of civil unrest. When we first arrived, we were given our company vehicles and put through a defensive driving training. And one of the first things they said was never stop at a red light. Right. Because car hijacking, particularly if you have a white face, was rampant. So they just would say, be vigilant, watch what's going on, but never stop at a red light. Otherwise, that might be the end of you.
Well, that's a good example of the British way isn't always the right way.
Yes, certainly in that case.
Yeah, great. That's great. And so this idea of relationships and seeing the whole person as well, how does that then kind of translate into Charles White? So when you kind of obviously bought the company in 2001?
Yeah.
Yeah, go on. How's that kind of shaped things for?
Yeah, well, I suppose that was the start of a journey of being intentional. I suppose that's a word that I like to use a lot, intentional instead of accidental, around lots of different ways. I suppose even as I got into that oil business, I hadn't really thought much about why do you work? What is work about? Yeah. And I think another story that helped me think about that, and that it does have relevance with Charles White. I was on holiday in West Africa, actually, in Senegal. A chap, just one of the local chaps there, he invited me to come with him into the bush. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, but I was assured it was safe. So it was just me and this guy. We were then, Senegal's a French colony, so my French was marginally better than my Spanish. So we talked and we walked and we talked and we walked, and we probably went about an hour into the bush just walking. And when we got there, he showed me a banana plantation that he had built himself, or that he had grown, he had planted, he'd got this little space, he'd cleared it all out, and this was his work. And that really struck me, because it made me think what work is. Because at that stage I hadn't, I think we've got quite a narrow definition of work. We kind of go to work. So we see work as just what we get paid in order that we live. And that really started me thinking work's an awful lot more than that. I was thinking as I looked at this guy and the pride in his eyes, I could see he was made to work. And I think we're all made to work. We're made to do something that makes a difference. We're made to work, I think. And I could see also what he did give him a real sense of dignity. And you can see that around about too. Whenever people aren't working, that's a big thing they talk about, is their lack of dignity. Yeah. Then I could see for him, he was taking something, and just because of his input with it, was making it better. You know, he was cultivating bananas, so he was tilling soil, he was watering, he was planting seeds, he was doing whatever you do with bananas to get them to grow. But that got me thinking too, you know, work is just, I'm putting something of me into a process, a service, or whatever it happens to be. And hopefully it's just that little bit better because of my input in it. And I think too, probably another thing is work is really, when it's done well, is about serving other people. It's less about me and it's more about whoever's on the receiving end of it. So those were the things that really were in my mind as I was thinking about Charles White. You know, why do I want a business? What is the motivation behind it? And this sort of ever broadening idea of what work is about was definitely it was very much to the fore in why I wanted to do it. Because I think when you have a wider definition, then your definition of success changes as well. You know, it's very easy. We talk about a successful business, and usually what people mean it's growing, it's profitable. It's, you know, that's the narrow definition, and there's nothing wrong with that. But my friend in Senegal with his banana plantation, he was a success too. He was a success because he was made to work and he was doing it, because he was experiencing dignity, because he was making a difference by him being involved, and because ultimately he was serving others. So that wider definition and understanding of what work is, that, I'm still sort of learning about that. And then that moves you on to the subject of vision and values and those types of things.
Well, you mentioned at the start, you said something there that sounded like it was the purpose of Charles White as you've defined it. What, can you say that again?
Yeah, so I think for me, a vision is why you exist. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why actually should anyone care? Yeah. And ours is, and I guess our vision is to make a difference in the lives of our clients, colleagues, and communities, and to inspire others to do the same. Yeah. Now that is broad, but it's still a filter actually, and it's a helpful way of being able to measure success. So I'm not, of course you need to be profitable too. I'm not saying you don't, otherwise you'd have no business. Yeah. But it's maybe more about where are your priorities in that. So I think answering that why question is really important. And I know that I went through certainly early part of career without really thinking about it.
And at what age would you say you were where you start to get clarity on that why? Because it's a really, really interesting kind of point that you're making. And I say a lot of people don't ever get to that point. But when did you get there?
Well, some of those, I guess I went to Venezuela in my late 20s. So probably between late 20s, early 30s, that was the time when you're starting to think a little bit more about some of those bigger questions, I guess. Because the challenge can be, especially at that stage in a career, you're kind of running at 100 miles an hour. You know, that's generally, if you're on a career path, those are the long hours, those are the, you know, making your mark, and that was the case too. But I think I'm grateful that for whatever reason, the provocation to think wider than that was there. Maybe it was because in Venezuela, I was on my own. I had quite a lot of time on my own as well. So I think those are very important. And then values as well. You know, how do we want to behave with each other within an organization? That's really what values are. They're just things that you value. But how do you define those? How do you celebrate those? How do you communicate those? How do you find people who align with them? So I think you're not saying that your values are right and someone else's are wrong. You're more saying this is what's giving clarity to our organization. It gives clarity and it gives a sense of identity. This is what we're about. And I think certainly that's been a learning experience over the years. So there's been times where, you know, people with technical skill coming out their ears have been, you know, we've been really excited to invite them into the organization, think that'll make a real difference. But then you're thinking, this isn't really working. Why is it not working? And pretty much every single time it's down to that sort of mismatch of values. So again, I'm not saying there's a wrong or mine or right. I'm just saying
for your business,
they're not aligned.
So how do you go from being in Africa, working with oil companies, to Charles White? Like, what was that story?
Yeah, that was, I think sometimes different things come together. You know, some people call it luck. I'm not a big believer in luck, but certainly sometimes there's a few different things come together in quick succession. And I suppose that's what happened to me. And the starting point probably was my now beautiful wife, Katie. That was the first relationship that started. So we started going out, if you can go out, when I was living in Venezuela and she was living in Jersey. I don't know how many thousand miles away that is apart. But anyway,
that's what's called a long distance relationship.
It is long distance relationship. For the first month of us going out, my phone bill was over $1,000. That's love for you. Anyway, so that was the initial and most important relationship that changed the course of life, because I was on an expat sort of trajectory, if you like, but I could see from my colleagues that there were a lot of benefits to it, but there were a lot of drawbacks too. So anyway, our decision was that we weren't going to go down that route. So Katie was the first one. Then by virtue of that, of course, I got to know her family. Her dad had been running a family business for many years, a sort of fourth, fifth generation business. And then we got into conversation, what about any interest in doing something like that? Not the one that he was involved in, but maybe another one. Yeah. So that sparked that idea. And then I had a conversation with a university friend who was working in an accounting firm here, and just saying, thinking about this, are there any sort of businesses that might be up for sale that are not too complicated that I can't understand them? So that was the other connection. And then the final piece of the jigsaw was the chap who owned Charles White at the time. He was looking to retire, and he coincidentally worked with the same firm of accountants, and said to one of my friend's colleagues, do you know anyone who's interested in acquiring the business? So those kind of relationships did all coalesce in very quick succession, and that gave rise to the opportunity with Charles White. So, yeah.
What was it like going into a company which was already pretty established in terms of, people? Like, how do you start to assert, and that's an aggressive word, but how do you start to assert leadership into that process as a new owner of a business that's been around a long time?
Yeah. I think because I'd spent a bit of time thinking about why I wanted to do it, I was enthused, I suppose, at my motivation, and enthused to be able to communicate that. And I think as I did communicate that, it was it was something new. I think it was something that was quite compelling to the people who were already in there. So they were enthused by it and excited by it. So an interesting story about a couple of elements of leadership. I remember one of the first meetings I had with the team. I was communicating this compelling vision, if you like, and I was sitting and really getting quite animated and enthusiastic myself, and I could see that they were too. And I was sitting. I had my leg crossed, and I was just sitting, and they were all gathered around, and I'd finished and got a round of applause, and was probably thinking, yeah, I'm pretty good, It was going to my head a little bit, and I got up to just walk away, and unbeknown to me, my leg had gone completely to sleep, and I crumpled in a heap on the floor in front of the gathered crew. So for me, that's a good demonstration of leadership. I suppose there is a responsibility to communicate that sense of where we're going. Yeah. But the other side of it is don't get too big for your boots. Leadership is a role. It's not a person. And I think that's a job to differentiate those. You've got a responsibility as a leader wherever that is. Yeah. But as a human being, as an individual, we're all the same, in my opinion. Nobody's any better or any worse than anyone else. So that was a really good reminder, and it constantly comes back to me. Another example of that leadership was I was in the Himalayas actually, and we were climbing one of the smaller peaks, not Everest or anything, but still pretty major. And we had a Sherpa by the name of Zhangbu, and such an example of leadership. that again it's constantly with me, that idea of serving as well as leading. So here's a chap who'd been up Everest, I think 7 times, at the top of his game, but he didn't see it beneath him to help me put my crampons on. I watched him go around our crew, and he was able to gauge where everyone was at. He was able to see the ability because he was interested, I suppose too, because it was, it was life or death situation. But he took the time to listen, to take the time that they needed to understand where they fitted. He put us in different orders when we were walking, when we were roped together. He just served us. So sometimes he was going ahead, moving the snow out of the way. Other times he was behind us. And probably one of the most incredible experiences, we'd come down and we were in one of the little tea huts, as they call them. And we were trying to warm up, and there was a big sort of fire, a big thing of coals over here with fire. The way they warmed up, there was glowing coals. There was something that covered it, and you kind of sat under and your hands got warm. And there was another one over here that had gone out. And Zhangbu, no word of a lie, Zhangbu lifted the cover off this one. He scooped up the coals in these old leathery hands and reached them over to the other side and lit the fire for us over there. And by that stage, we were all unbelievable.
Brilliant.
So yeah, servant leadership. I think leadership is all about serving. That's a lesson, like I say, I continually learn, but also that idea of separating the person from the role. I think it's easy to get carried away with the role of leadership. It's easy for too much of your identity to be tied up in that. I think it's really important to know who you are, to have a contentment in your own sense of identity. So that first and foremost, it's who you are. It's not what you do, because actually the what you do bit can change. And if too much of who you are is tied up in that, then whenever that does change, for whatever reason, then there's a bit of a problem. So how do you continually know yourself in order to lead yourself better? Or how do you go on that journey of self-discovery about your own personality? What are the things that you can bring to a situation? What are the things that you really know you can't? And I think as that grows, then it creates an interest in you to see that in other people. And I think that's how you can build a team. If you've got that real sense of self-awareness about you, and then you're starting to help others see it, then how you bring that together, I think is really important.
And what have you found out about yourself then through that kind of journey of self-discovery that's maybe surprised you?
Yeah, probably lots of things. I know that most of my conversation about things can often go on in my head, which is a characteristic of an introvert as opposed to an extrovert. So extroverts like to verbally process things. They love the enjoyment of a team and a group together. And introverts are more likely to be reflective and think those things through. So I remember in some meetings feeling my temperature rise a bit, because I would feel, would they just shut up? Why are they talking so much? I'm really getting annoyed at somebody talking far much more than I thought they really needed to. So that got me thinking, well, why am I getting annoyed? And then that journey of self-discovery, well, here's the way that I operate, just because that's how I'm wired. Here's the way they operate. They're not doing it to annoy me. So that was a great big aha. And there's different situations like that. So other people love to go into the fine detail of things and need all of that. And I'm not like that. So again, in the past, I could have found myself, do you not just can we not just move on? Do we really need to know all of this? And then realizing, well, yes, that's how they work. That's how they operate. And actually I can learn from that. And we're a better team if we recognize the bits that we play. I think a great example, a visual example of a team's like a rugby team. You look at them in the scrum half and the second row, they look so different, and the hooker and the prop and the fullback, and they're all visually very different. And I think in teams in the workplace, that visual difference isn't there. So you've got to be more intentional, back to that word again, to find out what is it that makes up who a person is, what do they bring, what are those personality characteristics that actually you want to champion.
And on that then, what do you do intentionally to go out, and how do you know what you're looking for, and how do you know what to say or do to find the thing you're looking for in a person?
I mean, there's lots of personality assessment programs that you can use, and I think they all bring something. Yeah. I think part of my learning was probably when I initially was really getting interested in this, I was trying to use all of them, and that was just confusion. So just land on one. Doesn't matter what it is, but land on one to give you those kind of main elements of personality. And those, I think the three things that I'm looking for in a person are, obviously you need IQ, let's say. You need intelligence and understanding and work-related competence. Yeah. So you need to have that. If somebody's going to be a computer programmer, you need to know how to do that. It doesn't matter how nice you are or how you need to be able to do that. Yeah. So that's one element. And then you need emotional intelligence, and I think that's about how you relate to other people. How do you read other people? How do you read a room? How do you realize that actually, if I've got some sort of fact to communicate, I might do it very differently communicating it to you to communicating it to you. So I think the relational connection in the workplace, certainly over the last decade or so, the importance of that I think has really increased. Yeah. And then the final bit is more the self-awareness, I guess. And that's where, that's where you can use some of these assessments. I think people are maybe growing in understanding that a little bit better, but certainly early in my career, I didn't really know that very well, and I don't think other people did too. So I think if you get those three areas right, so clearly you need the competency that the role requires. You want somebody actually who's got that emotional intelligence and probably wants to add to it. So they want to grow in that. They see that as probably just as important as the technical bit. Mm-hmm. And then you've got that desire for self-discovery, for self-awareness, and whatever sort of framework you use, that creates a vocabulary, I think, in a place. So we use a framework that's called 5 voices. So we have nurturers, guardians, creatives, connectors, and pioneers. And that's just a vocabulary, I suppose, that you can use. Yeah. So it's not to say that other things can't help, but suddenly you realize if some people, that's kind of if their foundational voice is guardian, then they're the ones who are great at the detail. They're the ones who are great at doing due diligence. They're the ones you want in charge of your resources. Yes. The connectors, they're the ones who if you need anybody to do anything, they'll know somebody. They've got quite a wide network of acquaintances and friends and so on. Yeah. So it's quite a high level one, but I think also within that, then the journey of self-discovery can continue with each individual as they realize their superpower, if you like, and how to develop it. So we're much happier to see that develop than to say, right, you're rubbish at spreadsheets. We really need to bring you up to speed. And much rather have somebody who loves spreadsheets do that, and this person just not go near it.
And do you have an example then, Eddie, of someone in the history of the business who actually they've just they've gone through that journey of self-discovery, and then really things have started to click for them, and they've just shone.
Apart from me.
Apart from you. Okay, well, no, it sounds like you've been a real student of your own self, and again, that's hugely admirable.
There are various examples. I think I can think of one of a young girl. She'd come up from London. I think her and her friend had just decided, we're going to go and live in Edinburgh and see what happens. So she got a job. She was one of our sort of administrative assistants. A real party girl. Just lived right in the middle of where everything was happening. She was great at what she did, but just as I look back on her career and seeing her grasp some of these things of self-awareness and really be enthused by it and have she had a hunger to grow too. I think that helps. You want somebody who's hungry, humble, and smart. You've got those characteristics in somebody that's a good recipe to work with. So seeing her progress, she had a desire, she had an interest, she developed an interest, I suppose, in the industry. I think initially she'd got the job just because it was a job, but then suddenly thought, well, I quite like people, and actually I quite like seeing how properties work. And so anyway, to chart her progress, she actually left last year, and I was there cheering because she outgrew us. Yeah. We were able to put her through a university degree course in building surveying, and see her come out the other end with first class honours. Wow. I couldn't have been prouder. Yeah. To see her and know that we've done our best. It was almost like when your child leaves home. There's a tinge of sadness and so on, but there's probably even more of a sense of pride. So that's one just great example of how that journey just became more focused, I suppose. I think that idea of intentionality was introduced into her career.
Nice. Do you know, we said just before we started here that I like my phrases, but the phrase that's kind of come into my mind there in that example is the one that says, our job as parents is to give our kids the roots to grow and the wings to fly. I don't know if you've heard that one. It sounds like that's certainly what you did for that. Well,
yeah. So how much of this was planned, I guess? Like you took Charles White, you started to grow it. Like what did the planning look like in the process to grow the business? And just talk me through.
I think I've already said I'm not a detailed person, so there wasn't a great plan, I've got to say. I think I was excited at the thought of having a business, somewhere where people wanted to be part of, somewhere where they could grow and develop and feel valued, somewhere where team was really important. So it was more the principles that were important to it. So there wasn't necessarily a plan in place of where it went. And I think, with hindsight, probably we could have done with better. I remember when I first started, I was doing an awful lot of the different roles. I remember even before that, the first week I started, somebody in the office came in and asked me, how do we order new paper tissues for the toilets? And what do we do? The fire extinguisher warranty was running out, and I was thinking, what have I done? What have I done? But I got over that. So one of the roles I took on, just because nobody else was doing it, was business development. And I didn't think I was any good at sort of sales, but there was nobody else there. And that was part of growing in self-awareness too, because I just had to go out of my comfort zone and go and meet people. I just had to get on the phone and say, are you up for meeting? I'm new here and all the rest of it. So it took 2 solid years of that before we got any new business.
Really?
Wow.
2 years.
Wow.
And then the first bit came in, and over that piece, I guess I learned to reflect. I think it's really important to reflect on our processes and see, because I'd never done it before. So we adjusted processes for new business. We adjusted what we gave. We adjusted how we communicated, all of that, and we just kept going with all of that. So when the new work came in, I suppose we'd learned a process, which was great. Definitely had built up some resilience. So there was an awful lot of no's before a yes came. Yeah. But then it did seem like the floodgates opened a little bit. Your name was known. Our process, certainly for getting new stuff, was good. And the new business just came in. And I think back to the question about the plan, where we didn't have a plan was, how do we cope with all this new business? So it was once we developed the strategy for winning it, that was okay. But then what was happening afterwards, what was happening behind the scenes. You know, it's very different, for example, taking on a development of properties that's already existing. So taking it from an existing management company to taking on a brand new development that's not quite finished yet. And actually people are moving in phases. And that was a huge learning curve for us. Also, the properties that we were taking on, because they were new, they were more complicated. There were different things used to build them. They just got more complex. So that new business wave kept going, but then there was a bit of a lag, and then a few years later we started losing stuff because we hadn't done that work in between, and that was a real learning business, or a real learning opportunity. And that was what I saw then, was getting somebody involved who was more into the detail. So I could communicate, I suppose I could communicate a compelling reason to come to us. And sincerely, that was what we wanted to do, but we weren't quite matching up with delivering on that. So again, that's back to team. Yeah, there's different people have different roles in all of that. So yes, we could have done with some other plans, but I suppose you learn as you go along, and sometimes it is really tough.
And on, since you took on the business, we're 20 odd years on from that point. So I mean, how have you seen the business grow? And kind of the impact that you've then had, because going back to your vision around, colleagues, clients, and community, what impact do you feel that you've had through the growth of the business?
Yeah, well, I think probably my primary area of influence is with the colleagues. It's with the team. It's valuing them. It's providing the environment that they can flourish, that they can enjoy what they're doing, providing the framework for them to be trained, to grow, and so on. And there's other things you can do in there too. So having a nice working environment. So 10 years ago, we moved from one office location to another one because we thought actually the environment is really important. So do we want to invest more in that environment? And the answer was yes for all of that. Yeah. And then I think constantly listening to how they are and recognizing the peculiarities of your industry. We do deal with a lot of clients, and it can be quite wearing, particularly the last couple of years. I think because we're one of those services where there is a person on the end of the phone, we can be on the receiving end of just some underlying anxiety or frustration or whatever. So it's certainly for those people who are directly client facing, it can be tough. It can be tough. So saying what can we do? We can't. Well, we're always trying to change our clients' perspective, I suppose, and the way they do things. But that's more. I can't have direct control over that. So what can we do? So one example was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I'd come across this idea of a 9-day fortnight, whereby everybody has one day off every other week. So we started looking into that and seeing, because that would just give just a wee bit of breathing space. Every other weekend, you've got an extra day. So it's not to be added to annual leave. It's just, we just decided it's Friday. That's the day usually everybody wants. We're not big enough to have a really complex system. So let's just have a sort of buddy system. So one's off one Friday, one's off the next, and we'll just see how that goes. So people can go and have a walk or do some DIY or go and get their hair cut or see their granny or whatever. So I think that, that was an example of really, I suppose, listening and seeing this is the environment that we're in. These are the pressures. What can we do to change? Because there's always something. There's things that you can't, but there's always something that you can make a difference. with.
Like that one.
Eddie, that's been great. We always finish our podcast asking people about their philosophy in business. So do you have a philosophy that you follow?
I think it has to be serving others, and I suppose a word I would use in that is humility, which probably in this day and age isn't necessarily a very popular word to use. I think it's often used in a negative sense, the big team humbled the little team or whatever it is. But I think humility is more a choice. It's not a comparison. I think it's a choice to put somebody else's needs ahead of yours. Now, that's not to say you're going to become a doormat and let people walk over you. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it's more having a perspective of being other-centered, I guess, of seeing what can you genuinely do. So as I say, it's not a comparison thing. It's not he's better or I'm better or anyone else is better. It's a choice. So every day I can have a choice of putting someone else's needs right down to letting people out in traffic, or it can be little things. But I think if that's part of your philosophy, as you say, I think you can find ways. If you've got something in your mind and a way that you want to operate, there's always ways of finding that. And I think in our industry too, just receiving appreciation makes a world of a difference in ours. And we don't do things to get thanked, but I think when you do get it, it just says we must be doing something right. So every month we have we read out the thanks that the clients have given to all of us. So that, we gather them all in and just all get together and read them out. And also we have internal thanks if somebody's helped somebody in a team, and that's just, I suppose, that is indicative of a culture that you want to create. And I think being in a service industry too, it makes you realize whenever you're the customer, if you like, in other situations, you're really proactive in showing your appreciation, whether it's at a Tesco checkout or wherever it happens to be. It doesn't take an awful lot, but it makes a significant difference.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Eddie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing a little bit of your story. And good luck with the future as you continue to nurture and grow.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant.